Welcome to Sleepy Stories, a place where the day's worries fade away and the magic of storytelling carries you to distant lands. Tonight, we journey to the vast, untamed deserts of the Wild West, where the stars shine brighter and the wind whispers secrets of old. Settle in, close your eyes, and let your mind wander as we follow the tale of a lone cowboy, his quiet courage, and the mysteries that await him under the endless sky. This is the Cowboy's Odyssey. Let's begin. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty plains of the Wild West. The air was thick with the scent of sagebrush and the distant hum of cicadas. Somewhere in the vast expanse of Texas, a lone figure rode atop a sturdy chestnut mare, his hat pulled low over his eyes to shield them from the relentless glare. His name was Jack Whispering Wind Callahan, a cowboy with a reputation as wide as the horizon and a past as tangled as a tumbleweed. Jack had been riding for days, his destination unclear even to himself. He was a man of few words, but his eyes told stories of battles fought, loves lost, and a life lived on the edge of civilization. His leather chaps were worn, his boots scuffed, and his revolver hung at his side like an old friend. He was a man out of time, a relic of an era that was slowly fading into memory. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jack spotted a small town in the distance. The faint glow of lanterns flickered like fireflies, and the sound of a piano drifted on the evening breeze. He nudged his horse forward, his stomach growling at the thought of a hot meal and a cold drink. The town was called Dustwater, a place so small it barely warranted a dot on the map. Its wooden buildings leaned precariously, as if tired from years of standing against the wind. The saloon, however, seemed to be the heart of the town, its doors swinging open to reveal a raucous crowd of cowboys, miners and drifters. Jack tied his horse to the hitching post and stepped inside, the smell of whiskey and tobacco hitting him like a wall. The room fell silent as he entered, all eyes turning to the stranger in the doorway. Jack tipped his hat and made his way to the bar, where a grizzled bartender wiped down a glass with a rag that had seen better days. "What'll it be, stranger?" the bartender asked, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over the din. "Whiskey," Jack replied, his voice low and steady, "and whatever's hot in the kitchen." The bartender nodded and poured a generous measure of amber liquid into a glass. Jack downed it in one go, the burn in his throat a welcome sensation after days of dry rations. As he waited for his meal, he scanned the room, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. There was a card game in the corner, a group of men laughing too loudly, and a woman in a red dress singing a mournful tune on the small stage. It was then that he noticed the man sitting alone at a table near the back. He was dressed in a black suit, his face obscured by the brim of his hat, but there was something about him that set Jack on edge. The man's presence was like a shadow, dark and unyielding, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Before he could dwell on it further, the bartender returned with a plate of stew and a hunk of bread. Jack ate in silence, his mind racing. He had come to Dustwater seeking nothing more than a night's rest, but something told him that his stay would be anything but peaceful. As the night wore on, the saloon grew louder, the air thick with smoke and laughter. Jack kept to himself, nursing another whiskey and keeping an eye on the man in the black suit. It wasn't until the clock struck midnight that the stranger finally made his move. He stood, his movements slow and deliberate, and made his way to the bar. Jack tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the grip of his revolver. The man stopped a few feet away, his eyes hidden but his voice clear as a bell. "You're a long way from home, Callahan," he said, his tone cold and calculating. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't introduced himself, and yet this man knew his name. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his chest. The man chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down Jack's spine. "No, but I know you, and I know why you're here." Jack's mind raced. He had no idea what the man was talking about, but he wasn't about to show it. "Enlighten me," he said, his fingers tightening around the grip of his revolver. The man leaned in closer, his breath hot against Jack's ear. "The Silver Star Ranch," he whispered. "You're looking for it, aren't you?" Jack's blood ran cold. The Silver Star Ranch was a name he hadn't heard in years, a place shrouded in mystery and legend. It was said to be hidden deep in the desert, a place where fortunes were made and lives were lost. Jack had heard the stories, but he had never believed them until now. "How do you know about that?" Jack demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The man straightened, a smirk playing on his lips. "Let's just say I have a vested interest in keeping it hidden. But if you're determined to find it, I won't stop you. Just know this. The desert doesn't forgive, and neither do I." With that, the man turned and walked out of the saloon, leaving Jack with more questions than answers. He sat there for a long time, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. The Silver Star Ranch was real, and it seemed that someone didn't want him to find it. But Jack Callahan wasn't the kind of man to back down from a challenge. If anything, the stranger's warning had only fueled his determination. He finished his drink, tossed a few coins on the bar, and headed out into the night. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the town. Jack untied his horse and mounted up, his eyes scanning the horizon. Somewhere out there, hidden in the vast expanse of the desert, was the Silver Star Ranch, and Jack was going to find it. As he rode out of Dustwater, the sound of the piano fading behind him, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the man in the black suit following him, but the road was empty. Still, the sense of unease lingered, a shadow that clung to him like a second skin. The desert stretched out before him, endless and unforgiving. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it the faint scent of something ancient and unknown. Jack spurred his horse forward, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and dread. He had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: his journey was far from over. The desert was a cruel mistress. By day the sun scorched the earth, turning the sand into a blistering furnace. By night the temperature plummeted, leaving Jack shivering beneath his blanket as he camped beneath the stars. He had been riding for 3 days since leaving Dustwater, and the landscape showed no signs of changing. The endless sea of sand and rocks stretched out in every direction, broken only by the occasional cactus or skeletal remains of a long-dead tree. Jack's water supply was running low, and his horse, a loyal mare named Belle, was beginning to show signs of fatigue. He knew he couldn't keep pushing her like this, but the thought of stopping gnawed at him. The man in the black suit had planted a seed of urgency in his mind, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. On the morning of the 4th day, Jack spotted something on the horizon. At first, he thought it was a mirage, a trick of the heat and his weary mind. But as he drew closer, the shape solidified into a cluster of buildings, their wooden frames weathered and bleached by the sun. It was a ghost town, long abandoned and forgotten by the world. Jack dismounted and led Belle toward the nearest building, a saloon with a crooked sign that read, "The Lucky Star." The doors hung loosely on their hinges, creaking in the wind as he pushed them open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the floor was littered with broken glass and debris. A piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed and cracked, and a faded painting of a woman in a red dress hung crookedly on the wall. Despite the decay, there was something eerily familiar about the place. Jack's eyes were drawn to a bulletin board near the bar, its surface covered in faded wanted posters and old newspaper clippings. One of the clippings caught his eye, and he stepped closer to examine it. Silver Star Ranch, the lost treasure of the West. The headline was bold, the text beneath it barely legible. Jack squinted, his heart pounding as he read the words. The article spoke of a ranch hidden deep in the desert, a place where gold and silver were said to be buried. It mentioned a man named Ezekiel Blackwood, the ranch's owner, who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances decades ago. The article ended with a warning. Many have sought the Silver Star Ranch, but none have returned. Jack's mind raced. This was the first real clue he had found since leaving Dustwater, and it only deepened the mystery. Who was Ezekiel Blackwood, and what had happened to the ranch? He folded the clipping carefully and tucked it into his pocket, his resolve hardening. He was closer than ever, and he wasn't about to turn back now. As he turned to leave, a sound from outside made him freeze. It was the faint jingle of spurs followed by the soft crunch of boots on sand. Jack's hand went to his revolver as he crept toward the door, his senses on high alert. He peered through the crack in the door and saw 3 men standing in the street, their faces obscured by bandanas and their hands resting on their holsters. "Come on out, Callahan," one of them called, his voice dripping with malice. "We know you're in there." Jack's heart sank. He had no idea who these men were or how they had found him, but he knew they weren't here to talk. He took a deep breath, steadied his nerves, and stepped out into the sunlight, his revolver drawn. "Who sent you?" Jack demanded, his voice calm but firm. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, smirked. "Let's just say we're here to make sure you don't find what you're looking for." Before Jack could respond, the man drew his gun, and the world exploded into chaos. Jack dove behind a water trough as bullets whizzed past him, splintering the wood and sending shards flying in every direction. He returned fire, his shots precise and deadly. One of the men went down, clutching his chest, but the other 2 kept coming, their guns blazing. Jack's mind raced as he reloaded, his hands moving with practiced ease. He couldn't keep this up forever. He was outnumbered and outgunned. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. As the 2 men advanced, Jack spotted a loose board on the side of the saloon. He fired a shot in their direction to keep them at bay, then sprinted for the building, diving through the gap just as a bullet grazed his shoulder. He landed hard on the floor, pain shooting through his arm, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. He scrambled to his feet and ran for the back door, bursting out into the alley behind the saloon. Belle was waiting for him, her eyes wide with fear. Jack untied her quickly and mounted up, spurring her into a gallop as more shots rang out behind him. He didn't look back, his focus entirely on the horizon. He had to get out of there. He had to find the Silver Star Ranch before it was too late. The days blurred together as Jack pressed on, his wound throbbing with every movement. He rationed his water carefully, knowing that one wrong move could mean the difference between life and death. The desert seemed to stretch on forever, but Jack's determination never wavered. He had come too far to turn back now. On the 7th day, just as the sun was beginning to set, Jack saw it. Nestled in a valley between two towering mesas was a cluster of buildings, their roofs sagging and their walls crumbling. A rusted sign hung over the entrance, its letters barely legible: Silver Star Ranch. Jack's heart leapt in his chest as he urged Belle forward, his exhaustion forgotten. He had found it, the place that had haunted his dreams and driven him to the edge of the world. But as he drew closer, a sense of unease settled over him. The ranch was eerily silent, the only sound the wind whistling through the empty buildings. He dismounted and approached the main house, his revolver drawn. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a dark and dusty interior. Jack stepped inside, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls were lined with faded photographs and yellowed newspaper clippings. In the centre of the room was a large table, its surface covered in maps and documents. Jack's eyes were drawn to a leather-bound journal lying open on the table, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. He picked it up and began to read, his heart pounding with every word. The journal belonged to Ezekiel Blackwood, the man who had built the Silver Star Ranch. It spoke of a treasure hidden deep within the desert, a fortune in gold and silver that had been buried to keep it out of the wrong hands. But it also spoke of a curse, a dark force that had claimed the lives of everyone who had sought the treasure. As Jack turned the final page, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the lantern and plunging him into darkness. He froze, his senses on high alert, as a voice whispered in his ear, "You shouldn't have come here, Callahan." Jack spun around, his revolver raised, but there was no one there. The voice echoed through the room, growing louder and more menacing with every word. Shadows danced on the walls, their shapes twisting and contorting into something inhuman. Jack's heart raced as he backed toward the door, his revolver trembling in his hand. He had faced many dangers in his life, but this was something else entirely. The curse was real, and it was coming for him. He burst out of the house and ran for Belle, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The wind howled around him, carrying with it the sound of laughter, cold, cruel laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As he mounted up and spurred Belle into a gallop, Jack knew that he had made a terrible mistake. The Silver Star Ranch was no treasure. It was a trap, and he had walked right into it. The wind howled like a pack of wolves as Jack and Belle raced away from the Silver Star Ranch. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, reaching out for him as if trying to pull him back. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had faced many dangers in his life, but nothing like this. The curse of the Silver Star Ranch was real, and it was alive. Belle's hooves thundered across the desert floor, kicking up clouds of dust that swirled in the moonlight. Jack glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the shadows chasing him, but the night was still and silent. The ranch was far behind him now, its dark silhouette fading into the horizon. Yet the sense of dread lingered, clinging to him like a second skin. He rode through the night, pushing Belle to her limits. The mare was strong and loyal, but even she couldn't keep up this pace forever. By dawn they were both exhausted, their bodies trembling with fatigue. Jack finally allowed himself to stop, dismounting near a small oasis he had spotted in the distance. The water was clear and cool, a rare blessing in the unforgiving desert. As Belle drank deeply, Jack knelt by the water's edge and splashed his face, trying to wash away the fear that's taken root in his mind. He pulled out Ezekiel Blackwood's journal, its pages now wrinkled and stained with sweat. He flipped through it again, searching for answers. The journal spoke of a curse, but it also mentioned a way to break it, a ritual that required an ancient artifact hidden somewhere in the desert. Jack's eyes narrowed as he read the passage. The artifact was called the Star of the West, a gemstone said to hold the power to banish the curse. According to Blackwood's notes, it was buried in a cave near the ranch, marked by a peculiar rock formation shaped like a crescent moon. Jack's heart raced as he realized what this meant. He had a chance, a slim one, but a chance to undo the nightmare he had unleashed. He looked up at the horizon, where the first rays of sunlight were beginning to peek over the dunes. The cave couldn't be far. He had to go back. The journey back to the ranch was a blur. Jack's body ached, and his mind was clouded with exhaustion, but he pressed on. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its heat bearing down on him like a weight. By midday, he spotted the crescent-shaped rock formation in the distance, its silhouette unmistakable against the barren landscape. The cave was hidden beneath the rocks, its entrance partially obscured by a pile of boulders. Jack dismounted and approached cautiously, his revolver in one hand and a lantern in the other. The air inside the cave was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the scorching heat outside. The walls were lined with strange symbols, their meanings lost to time. As he ventured deeper, the light from his lantern flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The cave seemed to go on forever, its twists and turns leading him further into the earth. Finally, he reached a large chamber, its ceiling dotted with glowing crystals that bathed the room in an otherworldly light. In the center of the chamber was a pedestal, and on it rested the Star of the West. The gemstone was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. It was the size of a fist, its surface shimmering with a kaleidoscope of colors. He reached out to take it, but as his fingers brushed against the stone, a voice echoed through the chamber. "You dare to take what is not yours?" Jack spun around, his revolver raised, but there was no one there. The voice came again, louder this time, reverberating through the walls. "The curse cannot be broken. It is eternal." Jack's hand trembled as he gripped the Star of the West. "I didn't come here for treasure," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "I came to set things right." The voice laughed, a cold, cruel sound that sent shivers down his spine. "You're a fool, Callahan. The curse will consume you. just as it has consumed all who came before you. Jack tightened his grip on the gemstone. We'll see about that. The journey back to the ranch was a race against time. The sun was setting by the time Jack arrived, its golden light casting long shadows across the crumbling buildings. He dismounted and made his way to the main house, the Star of the West clutched tightly in his hand. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist, their forms taking on grotesque shapes. Jack ignored them, his focus entirely on the task at hand. He placed the gemstone on the table and opened Ezekiel Blackwood's journal to the page describing the ritual. The instructions were clear. He had to recite an incantation while holding the Star of the West, then smash it against the ground. The act would release the gemstone's power and banish the curse, but it would also destroy the treasure forever. Jack took a deep breath and began to recite the words, his voice echoing through the empty room. The shadows grew more agitated, their whispers growing louder and more frantic. As he reached the final line of the incantation, he raised the Star of the West above his head and brought it down with all his strength. The gemstone shattered, releasing a burst of light that filled the room. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into nothingness as the light consumed them. Jack shielded his eyes, the force of the explosion knocking him off his feet. When the light faded, the room was silent. The curse was gone. Jack emerged from the ranch as the first stars began to appear in the night sky. He was battered and bruised, but alive. The Silver Star Ranch was no more, its dark legacy finally laid to rest. As he mounted Belle and rode off into the night, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The desert stretched out before him, vast and endless. But for the first time in a long time, he felt free. The curse was broken, and his journey was over. But as he disappeared into the horizon, a single shadow lingered in the ruins of the ranch, its form twisting and writhing in the moonlight. The curse was gone, but the desert never forgets.